4 listed buildings in England that were acquired over a 10-year period as part of an ambitious expansion plan by the Church of Scientology have been left empty. Together, they're worth over £10 million. The money to buy them was given to the church by wealthy supporters. The idea was to convert the buildings into local hubs to support the church's work and increase membership. So, what went wrong? Jeff Burt has been to see one of the buildings close to Manchester United's home in Old Trafford.
My word, it's really quite something. It's 4 storeys. It's beautiful old red brick in revival Gothic style.
Built in 1896, the Duckworth Essence Distillery manufactured flavourings and colourings for food and drinks. It was bought for the Church of Scientology by a wealthy local businessman in 2006 for just over £3.5 million. The church even made a video about their ambitious plans for the property.
Manchester, England. The world's first modern industrial city. It's the home of the original British working class. And it's also now the home of an upcoming new Church of Scientology.
In front of the actual building itself, it's nothing but weeds. And looking more closely, you can see plants growing out, buddleias growing out of the facade, out of the brickwork, out of the window frames. It really is something of a neglected beauty.
Few people around here know much about the building and the grand plans for it. Ijaz Malik is a local councillor, and he's dismayed that nothing's been done to the building.
We are very much concerned what is going on in this building. It has been empty for a long time now. It is owned by Church of Scientology. They have not tried to develop it. It is absolutely a disgrace to the building and to the local community. I would like to see this building developed for the use of community, where community can take some advantage of it. It can be converted into a hotel. It can be converted into apartments. We have got a shortage of housing over the whole country, not only in our Trafford.
The Duckworth Essence Distillery is one of 4 listed properties that were destined to become new hubs for the Church of Scientology. Shane Croucher is a journalist at the International Business Times who uncovered the property deals when he was working on another investigation.
We're talking about big, historic, listed, grand, beautiful, in some cases, buildings. In Gateshead, it's an old Victorian nursing home that was also a school. In Birmingham, it was this grand, huge mansion set in loads of land that was owned by a wealthy family of local brewers. And in Plymouth, it was an old sailor's home. So these are big, huge buildings listed, important to their local communities. They were then planning to redevelop them. And then within those buildings, there would be, a chapel, there'd be a sort of an academy. They were to be funded by local Scientologists. But as you can imagine, this was a huge expansion plan, very, very quickly done. And I think they have perhaps struggled to raise funds to renovate as quickly as they thought they could. So that's why you're getting these buildings in England left for such a long period of time.
The public were being asked to stump up all the cash for these buildings, and even when the buildings were acquired, then they were being asked to stump up cash again to renovate them. But of course the ownership of the buildings was transferred to the church.
Martin Padfield was a member of the Church of Scientology for 28 years. He left in 2008 after the church started buying the buildings. As he recalls, it was all part of an expansion plan called Ideal Organisations that was designed to boost their membership.
I don't know about all of the ideal orgs. The only one I'm sort of fairly familiar with is London, which I think was opened in 2006 in Queen Victoria Street. Very grand building just behind St Paul's Cathedral. I got into Scientology in London in the early 1980s when it was in Tottenham Court Road on 4 or 5 floors. The building was not particularly well renovated. It was fairly unkempt, but it was always busy. There was always lots of public there, and if you wanted to get a seat in the course room, for example, you needed to arrive early. Otherwise, you wouldn't get one. Since 2006 and the Ideal Org in Queen Victoria Street, it's been a very, very different story, and the number of public has been way down on what it was in its heyday. And that's a familiar story from the Ideal Orgs around the world. The idea or the premise that you just get this huge building, renovate it nicely, and the public are going to flock in is a very dubious business model, I would suggest.
Nobody's suggesting that simply owning these properties is a problem. The discontent lies in the fact that such prominent buildings appear to be lying idle and unused. The Church of Scientology didn't want to be interviewed, but they did send us this statement.
The creation of really wonderful places of worship requires a lot of effort and wherewithal. Our parishioners have been brilliant in being actively involved in purchasing buildings and fundraising for renovations, but the cost is great and takes time. We have recently invested £12 million into our Sussex properties, creating an ideal environment for our parishioners, visitors and staff, and will continue with the Pitmaston building, for which we already have listed building consent and change of use approval by the City of Birmingham.
When journalist Shane Croucher was digging through a property register, he made another discovery. The UK buildings were owned by the Church of Scientology in Australia.
It was in the late 1970s that they were able to set up this organisation in Australia, which is a religious charity, and they get tax-exempt status in Australia. Now, they don't have that status in the UK. They say it's just purely historical that they use this Australian arm.
So why had ownership been transferred overseas? Steve Cannane is the author of the forthcoming book, Fair Game, The Incredible Untold History of Scientology in Australia. He believes it could be down to a decision made by the High Court there in the 1980s.
An Australian journalist, Brian Seymour, broke this story 6 years ago that all the Scientology organisations and missions in the UK were actually registered at a suburban address in Adelaide. And I suspect the reason that this is the case is because back in 1983, the High Court of Australia determined that Scientology was a religion and therefore they don't pay tax. Now, I'm no expert on tax laws in the UK, but my understanding is that while Scientology is exempt from VAT, it still has to pay corporations tax. So potentially this may be a tax minimisation measure.
Transferring ownership of property overseas isn't illegal, and the Church told us in a statement,
For entirely historical reasons, the Church in England is part of an Australian religious charity. Our accounts are audited by independent accountants in the normal way, and any taxes which are payable are paid. The Church in England enjoys a lot of support from the international church community, including financial support. This is wholly about advancing the religion of Scientology. It does not save any tax whatsoever.
There's no sign of any work starting soon on the listed building that the church owns in Manchester, and Councillor Malik has had enough. He wants to see what powers the council has to save the building.
I wouldn't like to say this, but I think we have taken the notice regarding this, and we might be doing something in the future with it. We might take some sort of action.
That report from Jeff Burt.